This week on Aristeia 101, it's Blitz. Blitz, if you've been watching our game streams, has actually been a very popular scenario at the Maui Hexadome. So, as usual with deployment, the underdog chooses one deployment zone for their team. Their opponents will deploy in the opposite zone. There are two opposing deployment zones, as always. 1 and 4, 2 and 5, 3 and 6, the usual pairing. After choosing the deployment zone, the underdog decides which player deploys a character first. Afterwards, both players take turns deploying their characters one at a time until all the characters are deployed. Now, in contrast to the other scenarios we've reviewed so far, in Blitz, your characters must all be in your deployment zone. They may not be adjacent to it. This is an important difference. Scoring zones. During the first turn, as always, the central zone is the scoring zone. Now, this is going to be the key to Blitz here, as it's a very fast-paced game. So at the start of each of the subsequent turns, not rounds, but turns, before initiative on the turn phase, the underdog chooses that turn's scoring zone, but only if at least one player scored victory points in the previous turn. If neither player scored, the scoring zone remains fixed for one more turn. Only a deployment zone without characters inside it at the start of the turn can be chosen as a new scoring zone. Should all deployment zones be occupied, the underdog may choose any of them, then place all of the characters that are inside of it on free spaces adjacent to the zone. Now, deployment from the bench. Well, those characters may go from the bench to any deployment zone except the current scoring zone, as you'd expect. At the end of each turn, check whether either player has achieved any objectives. Award them the appropriate victory points if they have accomplished the following. Being the only player who has a character they activated this turn inside the scoring zone, well, that gets you 2 victory points and 1 tactic. Again, you gotta watch this very carefully. They have to have been activated this turn. That's key. So if there's another character in there, well, there shouldn't be. Well, there you go. If both players have characters they've activated this turn inside the scoring zone at the end of the turn, well, that's 1 victory point and 1 tactic. You get the idea that this is a very fast-paced game. And again, the characters have to have been activated that turn, so you couldn't use Hexer to push Maximus or somebody else into the zone for you. It actually has to be Hexer inside the zone, or Hexer keeping the other player out. But on top of that, there's one other scoring condition. So whenever an enemy character is moved to the infirmary, well, you get a victory point. Do note you also get a tactics card from that, but that's just normal what happens when you frag somebody. Now the end game condition is at the end of the 3rd round, not the 5th, the 3rd, or one of the players has scored 8 or more victory points at the end of a turn. They win. If there's a tie, well, whoever has the most frag tokens wins. There are a couple special rules. At the start of the game, the player with the lowest sum of initiative receives the underdog token. Well, that's actually kind of normal. At the end of each turn, the player with the least victory points receives the underdog token. In case of a tie, the underdog goes to the other player. At the end of the round, during the recovery phase, both players draw exactly 2 tactics. And in case any of the players that cannot draw tactics at some point during the game, they must shuffle their discard pile, forming a new tactics deck. Then the player will draw the required amount from the tactics deck. So you might say, okay, what's the big deal? That's the same, right? Well, again, it's at the you do have to note it's the timing at the end of the turn, end of the round, a little different. This is a fantastic game. This is one of my personal favorite scenarios, and we love it a lot in the Maui Hexadome because it's quick. A game can be over in about 30 minutes. In the amount of time it takes to play a game of Assault, for instance, we can actually do about at best 2 out of 3 series of Assault, and I love that. I do enjoy the longer games, don't get me wrong. That really gives you a lot of chance to flex options and plan things out, but there's something to be said about, well, playing Blitz. So you really want to use characters that can get set up and are ready to go very quickly. You kind of cannot ignore damage in this particular scenario. As always, things that influence movement, yours or your opponent's, fantastic. But you want to keep in mind everything here is quick. It's great. Next week, well, we're going to be talking about Carnage. Like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you then.